Well, joining us in studio now is Marc Schulman, editor-in-chief of History Central and a Newsweek correspondent, and Ruthie Blum, columnist for the Jerusalem Post and editor at the JNS News Service. Ruthie, let's start with you. Does President Trump deserve to win, to be consideration to win this year's Nobel Peace Prize?
Absolutely. He deserves consideration, and he might even deserve to win. The trouble is that that prize is a joke altogether. But considering previous winners, Donald Trump definitely deserves it, since he actually has brokered some peace agreements. And it's not only between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and other states seem to be following or will follow, but also between Kosovo and Serbia recently. So yeah, I would say, and because he withdrew the nuclear deal with Iran, and that can only contribute to peace.
Mark, what about it? Well, certainly you'll have something to say about the last point.
The last part, sure.
But it is true, and Ruthie is right to point out this breakthrough agreement between Israel and the UAE. She mentioned also Serbia and Kosovo. I mean, you could argue that's more than President Obama achieved during his time, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
By the time he won the prize, he certainly had achieved very much less than anything, quite honestly, because he got it as soon as he became president. But let's look at this. There's no doubt that the agreement that was reached is something that's good for Israel. If it's a prize for helping Israel, definitely he deserves a prize for helping Israel. But he didn't achieve peace between two warring countries. Let's be honest. These are two countries that have not been to war, so it's not really bringing peace. It's helping Israel strategically. It's helping probably the UAE strategically. It's selling arms, no doubt. He gets a prize as the best arms salesman in the world, without a shadow of a doubt. But a peace prize, as to Kosovo, the agreement with Serbia, it looks like that's falling apart. It was a big bluff, it looks like, in the end. So look, anyone can win the prize. There's no question that a lot of undeserving people have been nominated in the past, and even undeserving people have received it. I would go with more than like 50-1 as chances of actually receiving it. And the accomplishment, like I said, it's great for Israel. As for peace on earth, I don't think it contributes very much.
Okay, I do want to point out when Israel signed its peace agreement with Jordan, at that point, certainly those two countries were not at war.
They were in a state of war. Let's keep that in mind. There was officially a state of war between Jordan and Israel when we signed the peace agreement with Jordan. Not to mention, we fought wars. We killed Jordanians. Jordanians killed Israelis. That's very different. We've never fought the UAE, and we never killed any of their people, and they never killed any of our people. I think we may have operated on their soil a couple of times, but that's something else altogether.
Well, let's respond, Ruthie. Maybe respond to Mark. He's arguing that it's not a peace deal between Israel and the UAE, and it doesn't really serve the cause of peace.
Well, Mark is right that it isn't a peace accord between two warring nations, but I disagree that it's just good for Israel. President Trump, right from the beginning, he took the opposite position of his predecessor, President Obama. President Obama said, we're going to make peace with Iran. President Trump said, no. We are going to create an axis against Iran among Sunni, he called them moderate Arab states. I wouldn't necessarily call them moderates, but Sunni Arab states against Iran and against a nuclearized Iran. And this is part of that policy, and as an overall policy, it definitely contributes to peace in the Middle East and in the world.
Except for the fact that Iran has 10 times as much nuclear fuel as it is supposed to under the agreement, and looks like it's moving forward with this nuclear program, but I'm sure it's working out fine.
It was anyway, and it would have anyway. It was anyway.
We walked away from an agreement without Plan B, and there is no Plan B, but that's okay. I mean,
okay, but Ruthie is making the point, Mark, that this agreement it has resonance in the region beyond just being good for Israel and the UAE. It does create even the potential symbolism of a country that was boycotting, that even had a secondary boycott in Israel, is now waking it. It definitely changes the tone, the atmosphere, in creating, let's say, a more stable and ultimately more peaceful Middle East.
I have to agree with that. It certainly has potential for the future. It has potential for changing the conflict. Clearly, we're no longer in an Arab-Israeli conflict. We're in an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it's more or less limited to that, with various, side problems like Iran. So in that sense, it's positive, but mostly it's positive for Israel. I don't think it brings about more world peace. And again, the involvement of President Trump in this also is kind of minor, to say the least. When you look at the other people who got their prizes, these were people who were actively involved in negotiations at every point along the way. And President Carter, he brokered that peace. He sat there in Camp David for, I don't know, 6, 9 days, 10 days, together working on that peace agreement. Rabin, Arafat, and Peres, whether you agree with the agreement or not, they sat and negotiated to work out a peace. President Trump sent
to work out a war deal that ended up being...
Okay, that's a different... At the time, it was considered a peace agreement. So let's put it that way. We can argue the history at some other point.
I want to point out another point, and maybe one that maybe you have some issue with, which is President Trump has differed with a lot of conservatives in wanting to reduce the U.S. footprint. He's drawing down troops in Iraq. You could argue in some ways that he is more, let's say, anti-war than even some of the, let's say, Democratic or even more liberal presidents. He tried to reach a deal with North Korea. It didn't work, but he certainly did there, Mark. He did try. He has said that he's pulling the U.S. out of Afghanistan. I mean, do you think that also maybe qualifies him for a Nobel Peace Prize?
It could, but as I said earlier, my problem is also with the Nobel Peace Prize itself, because I think that all its winners, I think 100 prizes have been given, peace prizes, and of all the individuals and groups, it's a joke. They're always, I mean, including the UN High Commissioner.
Would you have said that when dissidents against the Soviet, when they were dissidents against Andrei Sakharov, did he not win, if I'm not mistaken?
That's a good question.
Was that a joke?
No, as I said, it wasn't all of them. Not all of them were jokes, but many were. And as I said, so the prize itself is not relevant, but I do think it's not that President Trump is withdrawing troops and therefore that's a peaceful act. Sometimes withdrawing troops is terrible because it leads to more war. I think that Trump's withdrawal from the nuclear deal creates peace.
I think his withdrawal of troops all over the world in his attempt to break up NATO, I would say he deserves the Chamberlain Prize, not the Nobel Prize.
Okay, well, let me ask you about the Nobel Peace Prize, because another argument that Ruthie's making is the prize itself has no value, though she admits when it was given to Soviet dissidents, it did certainly have some value for them.
Given to Chinese...
well, what about it, Mark? Why don't you answer Ruthie about the value of the Nobel Peace Prize?
Look, I think like every other international agreement and prize that exists, a lot of mistakes are made, a lot of politics are involved in the decisions, a lot of political correctness is involved. I don't think decisions are always right. I think it's positive that these things exist on total. I mean, there are other Nobel Prizes for other areas and Nobel Prizes for science and medicine and all those areas, and most of those selections are all very good. Nobel Peace Prize, of course, is the most subjective of them all, other than maybe literature. It's very difficult to say, well, he accomplished this and that and that, and so therefore politics get involved. So yes, I think it's
left-wing politics. Yes,
politics.
But Ruthie, if the prize, the fact is, peace is made between the leaders of often warring countries. It made by if the prize was simply given to, the Albert Schweitzers of the world or to charitable organizations, you might disparage it and say, listen, why don't they give it to some leaders who have to make difficult decisions to end wars? And those are often not admirable figures.
Well, that's true. And in that respect, I do think that Trump deserves it. And I certainly think Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, would apply in this case, yes. But as I said, I think it's really a left-wing prize, and I would rather see, it's one thing if you have a Nobel Prize for mathematics, science, all kinds of sciences, breakthroughs. Peace, as you say, it's not only that it's subjective, it's that you don't know till later how bad it was.
Well, some of these prizes are not, when you say a left-wing prize, Menachem Begin got the prize. It wasn't, he didn't win it as a left-winger. He did it because he made some sacrifices for the peace of his nation.
I have a problem with everyone saying, I think you don't like his left-wing.
Go ahead.
That's really a problem in all of our discussions.
And anything you don't like has Trump's name attached to it.
Well, at this point, Trump is, yes, you have to admit it. But generally speaking, I don't say everything I don't like is right-wing. I don't say everything I don't like is conservative. I mean, everything that someone doesn't like has become left-wing. Now, listen.
Not everybody. This is not everybody says it. I say it.
Okay, well, you're the person sitting here in the room, so I'll attack you at the moment. But the reality is, look, the world works in mysterious ways when it comes to politics. And yes, more countries would be defined by people on the right as being on the left, but they're not necessarily. And they make a lot of mistakes when they make decisions like that. Listen, any decision made by a committee, you know what they say about those sort of decisions. And these decisions are always made by committees. And so they're never the perfect decision unless it's very obvious. There are a few years when it was very obvious, whether it was, Begin and Sadat, that was very obvious and clear. And there are many cases where it's very obvious and clear. When it's not so clear, all sorts of politics get involved, and it takes away from it. Maybe they should give out less Nobel Prizes. Maybe that would be the solution.
No, and notice,
only give it every 3 or 4 years.
Ruthie, briefly.
Notice that even you introduced the person who nominated Donald Trump as a right-wing Norwegian politician, and everybody is introducing him in that vein. So when you say, I say left wing, to just as, let's put it in context that the person who nominated Trump, of course, is a radical right-wing Norwegian.
I did say radical.
No, you didn't say radical. You didn't.
He's calling
Okay. Well, I have to say that if I could get you two to agree on something, maybe I deserve the next Nobel Peace Prize. In the meantime, Ruthie Blum, Marc Schulman, thanks for joining us on The Rundown.